Welcome into the Keep Prowling podcast. Back once again, I'm your host, DJ Beal, and I'm here with a very special guest. I'm going to have to say that every time because they all going to be special, all of them. But I'm here with Jack Taylor from Bahakel Sports. Very excited. Bahakel Sports reporter. Just came on the crew not too long. How's things been going, first off, and introduce yourself to everybody so they know, because I'm sure they've heard your voice and they've seen your face.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me, man.
Of course.
It's awesome to be talking about this kind of stuff. I always love talking about the Panthers. I'm Charlotte born and raised. I grew up just down the road, in South Charlotte, went to Providence High School, so I've been a Panthers fan all my life, gone through all the ups and downs, and so now coming back as actually working in the industry and in the area, it's been a whole different kind of way of looking, at the Panthers and having to cover them from a non-biased standpoint, and try to not get too frustrated with what goes on. But yeah, I got here in February, and then I got here, I think, and then about a month went by, and then we made the trade for the number one pick. Mm-hmm. And so from then it's been, hitting the ground running, and we've gotten to go, to the draft experience was wild. That was so much fun. And then getting to go to OTAs these last few weeks, the voluntary, mini camp right before the draft. Mm-hmm. It's been really telling to see just how different of a vibe it is on Main Street right now. Yeah,
and I always like to say, the city's buzzing around.
Oh, yeah.
Not only having the number one pick, but just that little bit of the energy's up.
Yeah.
The energy is just it's up there right now because when you have the number one overall pick, number one, it's like, oh man, this is a chance to turn everything around. But also there's an added pressure that's and I talked with Lawrence last week about this. It's like there's this instant gratification mindset that everybody has where they want the Panthers to be good yesterday.
Yeah, and you have to kind of temper off your expectations of it, and try to. I've been going into it with very low expectations, and I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword because of the last 3-4 years. Yeah. It's different than when how the team was made up before we got Cam Newton. Obviously, it was the season right beforehand was brutal. It was an awful season, the worst season in franchise history. So there was that aura of we need to win now, but it wasn't as aggressive because it wasn't 3-4 years of just mediocre and head scratching football. So I think that's where it kind of comes into play. But you got to give it its time.
No, and two, because you said you're a fan also.
Yeah.
So how hard is it to cover the team that you love? Because you do have to take you have to take your biases out of it. You have to kind of just be impartial. But in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, come on, we can. You got that little bit of chin in the back of your head.
Yeah, and I think that honestly, in the same vein, when I was obviously growing up, and then my senior year of high school was, not to date myself, but my senior year of high school was 2015, going into the Super Bowl. So that was a whole obviously ridiculous experience. And as you grow and kind of mature and also just keep watching football as you go through college and adult life, it was kind of nice because the Matt Rule era kind of just broke me down as a fan, so I didn't go into it with as much aggression or passion about it. I was like, okay, I can just watch this and then walk away from the game and be fine with it. So it's been more obviously we haven't hit season yet, so I haven't gotten to that era of what it's going to be like when I actually cover competition. Yeah. But it definitely, there was, some starstruck moments when I first started off, the first few weeks, getting to be in a draft day or getting to be there out on the practice field. There was definitely some crazy moments where I was just like, is this really what I'm doing right now? Yeah. But I think with sports, it's, it's different because, we're not covering any sort of competing market in the area. Mm-hmm. So you almost, not that you get to have an air of bias, but you can kind of lean a little bit more. You want the team that you're covering to do well. That makes for better TV, depending on who you are. Some people say that, the worse the team is, that makes for some better, interactions. But I think that it's going to be interesting just going forward into the season. And I spent a lot of time when I was in college covering the team that I grew up watching in college as well. Mm-hmm. So I kind of already got a bit of a taste for how that goes. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Well, and I will say this real quick before we get into the main topic. I covered the high school I went to and the rival high schools that I went to before I came here. And it was interesting because I found myself kind of in a way like rooting for the rival high school too, because I wanted to see them do good.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what you just said. I wanted to see them do well, and it's kind of the same thing. I think we want to see the Panthers do well, and we want to see them rise to the top of the NFC South. Because they're going to schedule and everything like that. There's a chance there because last year they were 1-2 games away from hosting a playoff game, not just being in the playoffs, hosting a playoff game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting to see like the trajectory of the team, and we went out to OTAs, which was fun. It was fun to see Bryce in person, see him throw, see Andy Dalton in person, see him throw, see Hayden Hurst run his routes and stuff like that, see DJ Chark, Terrence Marshall, then these guys, and see what kind of work they've been putting in, right? So. What did you see? Did you have any big takeaways or small takeaways from OTAs?
So I think that the biggest thing from OTAs, obviously the question and the thing that's on everyone's mind is Bryce Young's size. And for me, it was there's a lot of times like I remember when you were on the field, when I was on the field like watching Cam Newton play, like in a couple games I got to go to, the thing that you had to your stomach was how giant Cam Newton was compared, like you saw him with like Shaq Thompson or the lineman, and he's towering over him. And so you kind of expect that same gut reaction with Bryce about, on the other side of the spectrum. But honestly, I think that it was a bit more of a calming thing to see, where when I was watching him running around, and obviously they're just, in shells, they're not running around with shoulder pads or anything. But he didn't seem to me to look... Like, I wasn't watching him and going, wow, he looks a lot smaller than everybody else while he was running through, the plays they were running. Yeah. Really, it wasn't until, I guess, like, the press conferences, where I'm like, okay, yeah, he is a tinier guy. Mm-hmm. So I think that was definitely a good thing to see. Outside of that, Terrace Marshall has been really, one of the bigger talking points throughout this entirety of OTAs, even really early on. DJ Chark's got a lot of, attention in his last week where he was finally able to go. But TMJ, like... When we drafted him, I was confused, and I understood why they felt the need to do so, but I thought at the time period, I was always the biggest proponent of get a lineman. We need an offensive line. It's not going to matter. And for the longest time there, I was confused because, that pick for TMJ, second round, getting him right off the bat, I was like, okay, he was not even the number 1 or 2 guy at the school he was at. If you're trying to get, a number 1 or number 2 guy, I didn't see that as a real need for us. So that's where I got a little bit confused. And then we've kept looking for him, especially because with having the Joe Brady, connection there off the bat, we kept looking to see, okay, where's this red zone threat? Where is this big, this big tall guy that we can go for a deep ball threat? And I think like the Bengals game last year was the first time you kind of saw any flashes of that. And so now this team is not necessarily his, because obviously with Thielen and Chark coming in, he's going to still have competition. But Reich seems to be setting it up for a big wide receiver by committee group for this upcoming season, which I think is going to be great. So, but I think that will definitely lean on what TMJ can do and then how the rest of them can all file forward. Outside of that, trying to think, obviously there's the bigger things with like edge rushers outside of Burns. Mm-hmm. They seem to be content with the guys they have at this moment. And with putting in the new scheme, I understand taking, the time to see how these players will fit into that scheme. Mm-hmm. I think that scheme is good for our defense as it's set up right now. I think it would have been a lot better if Reddick was still on the team. Yeah. But, hindsight's 2020.
I was a little surprised that they let Reddick go. Like, he's still pretty young, like a guy who you can kind of put in a couple of different areas. He's very versatile player. Yeah,
I think that one of the biggest issues with Matt Rule was that he was very, very good at evaluating talent and putting a marker on certain talents, and sometimes he went a bit too biased with his Temple and his Temple connections or his different connections from other schools. But he was very good at being able to, and as with Fitter, Fitter was obviously, that's been the biggest thing from him. But then Rule just had a very big issue with coaching guys and retaining guys. Yeah. It was very telling when you see guys like, he's telling guys like Carlos Dunlap that you still have to prove yourself to make a starting roster, and you've got a multi-Pro Bowler.
Right, like he hasn't already done it time and time again. Yeah.
So Reddick, it was like Reddick and Gilmore, both of them, they would not have, the money was one thing. They definitely deserved the money they were given, but they just, I think, also, didn't want to stay around that mentality. And so now we're kind of having to, the team's kind of having to pull itself away from that because of it.
Yeah, and I think too, like, I think sometimes general managers get an unfair shake because the GM's job is to put the best players around the team, but the GM's job also is to kind of lean into the philosophies of the coach and the offensive coordinator. So like if Matt Rule wanted certain guys, then Federer's got to put the proper guys around Matt Rule so Matt Rule can be successful. But then Matt Rule struggles could then fall back on the GM. So that's kind of one of the things that I've been learning as I continue to learn football every day. Learn these new layers because there's so many layers beyond the game. And for me, I mean, I think what I saw in terms of like OTAs and everything, it was cool to see all the new faces. They made splash after splash after splash in free agency this offseason and made it really exciting to see because you're like, oh wow, what are the Panthers going to do? What's the next signing? How are they going to replace DJ Moore? And then they replaced him kind of like you said by committee, right? They got veteran Adam Thielen, veteran DJ Chark, right? Terrace Marshall in there who is a guy who's going to probably make some strides because of the guys around him, and adding Hayden Hurst, Miles Sanders. I mean, the list can go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it like you said, going back to your original point about Bryce and his, stature and all of that, because that's the big point of contention that people have, and to each their own. But I find it interesting because what I like about Bryce Young is his work ethic.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Like when you listen to him talk, when you listen to him and people are like, well, but what about your height? But what about, are you going to be able to see over the offensive line and all this? He's just like, I've been this size my whole life, right?
Yeah.
I think Jeff Taylor, who was on a couple weeks ago, I think he even said, he was like, he's a guy who's going to come in and say, there's no excuses for Bryce Young. He's been successful at every level, right? He's been successful in every way, and the NFL level is not going to stop him. And that's what I like about him, and he's got the talent around him. The defense is going to continue to get better, and I'm excited just to see what's going to happen. I'm excited for that home opener to, number one, see how many fans are jumping up in the stands, but also, just to see, no matter who's out there, just to see this kind of new cast of characters. It's very interesting to see, and of course, I know we talked to DJ Chark in the last days of OTAs last week, and it was interesting to hear him say too, like, these guys are working hard, and that's the one thing I love about OTAs, I love about practice, especially like off-season practices, is even the teams that are sometimes overlooked, you can tell they're working hard, right? You can tell they're working their butts off. You can tell they are. I mean, they're trying to get to the same level that everybody else is. The goal's the same. The goal's the same, but I will say it's very interesting. Speaking of kind of the new cast of guys, the new cast of characters, there's a lot of top free agents out there too, right? There's a lot of, of course, there's Deandre Hopkins, who becomes the biggest name. There's Dalvin Cook, who slid himself in there as one of the bigger names too. And it's very interesting, of course. Dalvin Cook is one of those guys you don't necessarily know if they need because they picked up Miles Sanders, right? DeAndre Hopkins, do they have too much in that wide receiver room where DeAndre Hopkins wouldn't fit in there? What do you think about because Ngakwe's still out there, right? There's edge rushers still out there. Marcus Peters is still out there if you need some corner depth. What do you think in terms of the free agent market? Like, is there anybody that's kind of a late pickup that could really help the Panthers probably day one?
Oh, and there definitely is. Before I'll say that, I will say this: it has been pretty cool and pretty interesting for me, especially like to come into the market in February. Starting off now with also, brand new head coach, brand new quarterback. You talk about the new cast of characters. It's almost like getting to grow with the organization. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting to do that kind of starting off and, and also then covering it alongside some names in Panthers media that I've, followed forever. So that was really also really cool to do. But when you talk about free agency, I think that, one of the biggest things with free agency, and especially with Scott Fitterer and just the Panthers in general, is that, and you talked about it with how Fitterer had to kind of go and deal with, had to work with Matt Rule, work with the offensive coordinator. And I would love to have been a fly in the wall for a lot of those meetings because the biggest question for the entirety of the Matt Rule era was who's making that final call. When it's draft day, when it's free agencies, when it's, roster move, when it's, obviously outside of contracts, we knew that was Fitterer. But like when it comes to actual roster moves, who was making that final call? Yep. And I think that, he even alluded to it. He didn't really ever say it on, verbatim, but there was always questions asked, like, how has this process gone differently than during different drafts with Matt Rule, because this was Fitterer's first draft, kind of where he got to be himself and make the moves. Obviously, it was still a collaborative effort, but he was the one leading the charge, is what it seemed to be. And you saw every guy that we've gotten, other than the one head scratcher in DJ Johnson, has the ability to make an impact right off the jump. So for free agency, I think along that lines, as growing up, it's always the the meme they would post where it's like the drawing of the dude with the stick poking, come on, do something. That's what free agency was for the Panthers for forever. We're not a team historically. The Panthers are not a team historically that make that move. That early season move, that early offseason move. I mean, as far as free agency goes, they take a tendency in their history is to either get guys coming kind of the tail end of their careers. You get your Roman Harpers, or you get your Charles Tillmans, you get Jared Allen, guys at the very tail end of their careers that still have some stuff left in the tank. The biggest name they've ever picked up in free agency per se would have probably been, and it wasn't even big at the time. I mean, it was big at the time. Would have been probably like Jeremy Shockey, and then getting Greg Olsen at the same time. I mean, obviously guys like Steven Davis. There was not a whole lot of history of big free agency acquisitions, and so for the Panthers to make I was not expecting the Miles Sanders move at all.
Yeah,
I was that blew me away, and it was crazy because we had. We had the guy that we have, and his name is escaping me at the moment.
Are you talking about Chuba?
No, Donta Foreman.
Yeah.
Sorry, we had Donta Foreman, and we didn't know what was going on there. That move was surprising. I mean, even the Adam Thielen move, Adam Thielen was a bit more along. I was like, okay, I've seen that. We've done that before. We've gotten it with we've gotten it with different receivers like Torrey Smith. We at the tail end of his career, or Jericho Cotchery. During the Super Bowl run, we've done that before. And then the Hayden Hurst move as well. That was a big one. He's got a lot of potential at the tight end position.
Former first round pick,
former first round pick. And got kind of overshadowed in Baltimore by Mark Andrews. I mean, how do you combat that?
For good reason. Yeah.
And then in Atlanta, Kyle Pitts too. What are you going to do there? And then finally was able to kind of make a name for himself in Cincinnati. So I think that would be a big move as well. But. And then look at the defensive side of the ball. Von Bell and Eric Rowe. I mean, guys that just, names that we weren't expecting to get. And so I think because of that, though, even with the cap space they have, I think that it's going to be a while before they pick up another guy. I think that, I knew they were going to wait until after the draft.
Yeah.
And I think that they'll definitely at least wait till, I'd say, around probably post-training camp. I mean, it'll be late into that second round of free agency, if anything. And if not, after that, I could see them, depending upon, how the year goes. There's been a lot of teams in the past few seasons, ever since, the Bucs did it with Brady and Gronkowski and getting all those guys, where there's been a consistent pattern of these championship caliber teams picking up these big names in the middle of the season. Yeah. Leonard Fournette and Antonio Brown for the Bucs, and then OBJ and Von Miller for the Rams. Getting these bigger guys halfway through the season because they're trying to make a Super Bowl run. I don't think the Panthers will be at that point this season, but I could see them getting to a point where they need to make a big name. Yeah. That being said, DeAndre Hopkins is not coming here. It's not happening. It's not his hometown team. They love to say that. It's not. It's just not. It would be cool. It would be nice.
You think it's a needle mover if he did?
Honestly, I think it's more of a detriment than it would be beneficial, because then we talk about the guys that we're trying to pull, that the team is trying to pull stuff from. Your DJ Chark, Jonathan Mingo, Terrence Marshall. You can't have all four of them on the field. For the majority,
and then you got Hayden Hurst too. You want to incorporate him in there, and there's a cast of tight ends.
Miles Sanders is going to be running, routes. You've still got guys like Shi Smith. There are too many wide receivers honestly in this room for them to add another one. And I think that while he would obviously be the best receiver on the team at that point, I think it would just serve. He's not going to stay long enough. To pay the dividends, I think that would cost.
Yeah. And I think there's better options for him for what his probably end goal is, which I would say would be a ring, right? Yeah. I think Buffalo, they need him, right? Baltimore probably wouldn't hurt to have him.
Baltimore would be
Kansas
ridiculous.
City definitely wouldn't hurt to have him because
no.
Juju's, I can't remember what Juju is, but he's gone.
Yeah.
Right? They got Valdez-Scantling, and that's about it. Like
Yeah.
Travis Kelce. So adding one more guy into that with the rookie they drafted, and then I can't remember the guy they drafted last year. Like there's room in that wide receiver room for a guy like Deandre Hopkins. But then too, you got Dalvin Cook. Now, before they grabbed Miles Sanders, Dalvin Cook would have been a good option. But with Miles Sanders, I don't know if Dalvin Cook fits into that room anymore, because now you got Miles Sanders, and you got some other guys backing him up that can really come out and make a really big 1-2 punch, right? Because I know they want Miles Sanders to be a 3-down back, but having Chuba Hubbard or somebody else like spell him out, it's still going to be big. I do think, I'm always under the impression, both with wide receivers and cornerbacks, you never can have enough.
Very
so
true.
Marcus Peters is a good one, right? Because Marcus Peters is a guy who, pending J.C. Horn's health, right? You got Dante Jackson out there. It really just depends on what you need. And if Marcus Peters can play a lesser role, that's going to be big for him too. And I think my thing about Marcus Peters is I don't think last year he had a struggle. I don't think last year was a struggle for him because of age. It was a struggle for him because in week 2 you threw him out there against Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and those boys, and he was just expected to be 100% coming off an ACL tear. So I think him being a little bit closer to 100% could be a big thing for the Panthers too, just to add a little bit of depth. I know Ronald Darby's out there, and when it comes to like edge rushers, you got Nick Ngakoue, right? You got Jadeveon Clowney, other guys that you can just add extra pieces to, because edge rusher is another one where you can't have too big of a rotation when it comes to edge rusher. Like edge rusher is one of those positions where you can throw so many guys out there. There was a reason why there was a NASCAR package in New York a while back. So
yeah.
I think there's needle movers. It just depends on what the Panthers want to do, because they've already made splash after splash this offseason to improve their team. And I don't know if they expected some of these guys that were out there, that are out there now, to be out there then.
Yeah, I don't think that they definitely thought. I mean, the Dalvin Cook thing would be interesting because they don't have that, set right now, the 1-2 punch. I mean, that the big bruiser, that they've had, and with like they had last year with Foreman, and they've had in different ways, like the old smash and dash with D'Angelo and Jonathan Stewart. We've never had a duo since then like that. Yeah. And I think that they've got guys that have the potential. Spencer Brown's been on the team for a couple of years now and has always seen those flashes. He's 6 foot, 200 pounds, so he's got that ability to bust through. Same with there's a new kid that they got off of UDFA, Cameron Peoples from App State, and he's he's somebody that people would like to see pop off, and he's the same way. He's 6'1", I think, maybe 195, 200. Yeah. So they've got the potential for some bigger guys there. Dalvin Cook could obviously provide that in a way. But yeah, I think the running back room is not one they're going to touch.
You don't think they'd grab a Kareem Hunt maybe? Because he's a guy who's been that number one guy. We saw it in Kansas City. He's been that number 2 guy in Cleveland, and surprisingly, I think it was more so him personally than it was his talent wise. Is why he's not in Cleveland anymore. So I think he could be a guy like another veteran guy you could put in there that some of these younger guys can learn from.
I agree. I would agree with that. I think that because Miles Sanders, has only been in the league for a few years. Yeah. I mean, he's not been in the league that long. Chuba Hubbard, obviously, was only been in the league for a few years or so, and I've always liked Chuba and what he brings to the table. I think the issue that they're going to get themselves into, and this goes for all of the free agencies, that $27 million, where it is great for where we need to be, top 2 in the league, but when you get it, it depends really almost more on the desire from the player. Like, I think a lot of these guys could fit in the scheme and do fairly well, but it depends on the money they're looking for. Like, Clowney was a name that, he's supposed to be the best thing for this kind of scheme. The hybrid guy can stand up, can go on all fours and do what needs to be done, but he's going to want more money than, we're going to want to give him. With the $27 million, you're going to get this thing where you either got to shove a lot of that money into a big name or spread it around on a couple different bargain bin guys that can, kind of just be depth chart fillers. Yeah. I think, depth-wise for wide receiver, I think we're all right. Cornerbacks, I've been the same thing, with cornerbacks. We needed to draft cornerbacks. We needed to prioritize cornerbacks. And, they did for a couple years there, and it just kind of turned into this, rotating cast of just, support that either didn't stick around or, wasn't able to pan out. So I think that there's no way I think that they can go into this season without putting someone on the edge or in the defensive back position. And I say it because they've touted the guys they've gotten. Eric Rowe, Jamie Robinson they drafted, guys like Amari Barno and Brandon Smith. They've touted them all to be guys that can go both ways, can do that kind of hybrid stuff. Rowe and Robinson both have ability in the corner and the nickel position. And then Barno, has the ability to be a hybrid as well. Brandon Smith has got that speed. Jeremy Chin as well, obviously. But the problem becomes then if you prioritize them doing so, not only like you're treating them as both your starters and your depth. Mm-hmm. So if they're running there, 45% of the snaps each week, well, they're also your depth. So if one of your starters goes down, then you lose that piece of your strategy, and then you lose the ability to have any depth. Now, say Marquise Haynes goes down, in a few weeks, that means Barno's got to start. Now there's nobody behind Barno that can actually make an impactful play. Same with, someone like Eric Rowe. Say Von Bell goes down. Mm-hmm. Now you got to throw Eric Rowe back there, and then you lose that guy who can play that nickel position, because all three of our starting cornerbacks have either saw zero action during OTAs or only a little bit of action. Mm. And that is frightening, I mean, it's really – we saw obviously the impact it had in Tampa Bay last year to have your two starters down, and Keith Taylor and CJ have so much potential. But I just think that, there's just no way that they can go into it with not. I could see them going for a guy more like Byron Jones, a cornerback who might not want as much money. I think Marcus Peters would definitely want a bigger contract. Yeah. Ronald Darby, I think I wouldn't put the money on Ronald Darby per se. If they wanted to go safety, like Adrian Amos is a guy that was always interesting, but that's one of those guys they've danced around for with a while. The thing with Jadeveon Clowney, that's the same way. Like I just don't think he would provide any reasoning, and it would be cool to see the kind of the hometown, but. Yannick Ngakoue, that's the main one.
Yeah, and the thing about Ngakoue is he's young, right? Like he's only 28. I think like sometimes like he's been around a couple teams, and I think that can scare some people because like why can't he stay on the team? What's going on? What's why didn't Indy re-sign him? Why didn't Baltimore re-sign him? Right? So it's like it's one of those things where you're like. Is he as good as we think he is? I think he's been on the Raiders too. Like, is he as good as he think as we want to evaluate him because he's so young. But I think at the same time, like, he could be a guy that, like you said, is a chess piece, right? A guy that he may not be your main pass rusher, but a guy who can come in and make a play on a big third down, a big second down or something like that and back that opposing offense up. And then back to that cornerback discussion, the one thing about corners and why you can't have too much is look at the wide receiver rooms around the league. They're stacked, right? You got to have practically number ones all over the place, right? You got to have a number one slot guy. You got to have a number one left corner. You got a number one right corner. There ain't no number one, number two nickel no more. Like that's not even how it works anymore because it's one of those things where you got to have guys everywhere. And yeah, Byron Jones I think is an interesting one, just because he was a top corner 2 years ago maybe. So I always feel like as players get older, if you put them in the right role where they don't have to do as much, it's a win-win.
We went to the Super Bowl with people are so quick to forget. We went to the Super Bowl with Josh Norman, and then it was Charles Tillman. It was Charles Tillman, Roman Harper. Trey Boston, Kurt Coleman, and then Bené Ben-Wickery, and then Cortland Finnegan. And those three, Roman Harper, Cortland Finnegan, and Charles Tillman, and they weren't just kind of putzing around. They were making impactful plays late in the game, and so I think that you definitely for cornerbacks, and they're going to find out real quick. You talked about the receiver room. They're going to find out real quick how brutally outmatched we are in that position. You see Seattle week 3. Yeah. That already off the bat. Tyler Lockett, and then of course Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then oh God, help me, I can't remember his name.
You talking about Seattle?
Yeah.
You talking about DK?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And then DK Metcalf as well. Yeah. So they've got already 3 just ridiculous receivers. And then the next week, Minnesota's not as scary. But then you look at Detroit and Miami. Detroit's nothing to sniff at with Jameson Williams and with the guys they have, and then of course Miami too. If there's a week where they're gonna be
you're gonna learn today.
If we haven't signed a cornerback by then, Miami will be the week we go. Okay, we need a cornerback right now.
And even looking within the division, New Orleans, they have a lot of talent. Right, Michael Thomas, Chris Olave. They want to drop his Landry a little late. They can bring him back if they want to.
Yeah.
Right. And Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay. They may not have the quarterback, But they got guys who are going to get open, right? Mike Evans is still Mike Evans until proven otherwise. Chris Godwin is still, he's still going to be good. So, I mean, it really just depends. It just depends on kind of if they feel like they have enough or if they feel like they need kind of the extra guy. I think another guy who I know, I understand. Don't get mad at me. Don't cut the show off. Don't dislike it. Don't, unheart it from your favorites. But a guy who could be a potential depth piece may not be that guy, right? But he could be a potential depth piece. He played the number 2 for Cincy last year.
No, absolutely no.
Eli Apple,
no,
right?
Absolutely not.
Now, albeit, look, I'll say it. I'll say it. I don't think it's a great move, but I think in terms of if you need somebody to come out and make a play every so often, maybe, right? Now, I mean, I know, right? I understand.
I can't do it.
I understand. Considering, I mean, there's better options out there, right?
Yeah.
But if you're talking about a guy who's probably going to be cheap, who's probably, he's got the
cheap.
veteran presence, he's been to a Super Bowl, I don't know. You might have to take the chance.
I mean, the only reason I would say it is because when he had his more impactful role in the last few years would have been in Cincinnati, and then you have the ability to bring him in with Von Bell. That's the only reason that I would say, maybe I could see it is you have the, the connection there and the chemistry off the bat, which we tried to have, with C.J. Henderson and some of the guys that he had brought in. I don't think that, I think that if you're going to go back to cornerback position, like you need someone. I think, like you said, the better, the older, reliable. Marcus Peters is an interesting pick. Same with Ronald Darby. I just think it will be something that they're going to take a lot of time to evaluate, and I think might even come more so in the form of a trade than it does in free agency.
Yeah. And Danielle Hunter is another guy who could be a depth piece if they want to. If they want to bring in, a good veteran guy who, can rush the passer too, stop the run, a little bit of everything.
I think, they've been saying that people, they've had multiple talks with different teams. I could see us being one of those teams. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be shocking to me. I think that I wouldn't mind a linebacker. I think that, going into it with the group we have, I'm a little concerned about. And I think Leonard Floyd would have been a great one to put in there. Yeah. And I think I think he gave a big discount to, to the Bills to have a chance for a contender, and I think that's the thing that you're going to get with these free agents also is that there's going to be a little slow to take a chance on Carolina just because of the just the way the organization set itself up the last few years.
There's a little bit of uncertainty there where you don't have as much uncertainty with the guys who people are touting as contenders per se, right? I mean, I think Carolina is still. Probably 1 year away from where they want to be. Mm-hmm. I think they got a chance to make some real noise this season.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think it's still gonna. There's a lot of gelling and meshing that comes with this too.
Yeah, I mean, it's your first year with this coaching staff. I mean, that's that's you can't. It doesn't matter how good your team looks on paper. It's going to take a while to get things going, and so I think that's definitely we have the chance to make some splashes. Absolutely, the NFC South. It's really dependent upon, I think, how the Saints can stay consistent and with their new head coach, how they can continue what the Saints have normally done. And then for the Falcons as well, if they talk a lot of talk and they've done a lot to, put this team together. And I've seen, flashes of what I think it could be. And then as far as the NFC overall goes, I think, the NFC has always, been at a different level than the AFC. The AFC's always been a bit more, a lot more teams in the field than the NFC has in years past, and I think obviously with Aaron Rodgers leaving, that's created even more of a vacuum. Mm-hmm. With the NFC North, the NFC East is going to be I think another free for all again. Yeah. I could see it going depending upon how long Saquon Barkley sits out, and then the NFC the NFC West is again another just kind of it's anybody's game up there. We don't really know, that's another that's wide open. Like you have your either set like 1-2 teams for each division in the AFC, but with the NFC, a lot of them are just wide open.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to, as we wrap up, I do want to say this and ask this question actually. And if you haven't answered my question out there yet, be sure to answer this. I'm gonna ask it to you, and it's also for y'all too. Question is, what's your favorite game or the game you're looking most forward to when it comes to this season. I mean, for whatever reason, I like that Texans game. I don't know what it is. I think it's the rookie on rookie battle.
I mean,
it's like two young teams. Like you don't know what you're gonna get from either one of them. I mean, that's a fun game to me.
Yeah, I mean that's the one the NFL is hoping for. To be another kind of generational one. That's the new supposed to be. That's hopefully the new Joe Burrow versus Mahomes. That's going to be hopefully what they want. They always love the 1-2 matchups. Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota. Yeah. Zach Wilson. And guys like that. Like that's always an intriguing thing. Mm-hmm. I was surprised. I thought that could even be a Thursday nighter. There's not enough I think on either team to do it. I think it could be flex potentially. It's intriguing. There's a lot of different ones. Obviously, the Chicago one sticks out. The Chicago one has a lot riding on it just because of the fact that you made the big move to do so, and you have DJ Moore obviously coming back, and the Bears. It's going to be an interesting point. That many weeks in, the Bears could either be 8-1, they could be 5-5. Like they're so open right now.
Who knows what they're gonna do?
I think for me though, personally, the most intriguing game comes pretty early on, and that's the home opener.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the home opener is coming out of Atlanta, and we haven't had two divisional games back to back. The Panthers have not had two divisional games back to back in a while. They haven't had a Monday night game since 2018.
Wow.
Against the Saints. Back in when they hosted. That was the last Monday night game they played. Mm-hmm. And so I think that one, you're either depending upon how it goes, you could either be 1-1 the division, you could be already down a game, you could be, you're going to be 2 weeks into the year and already two divisional games in is going to be impactful for the rest of your season going forward. Yeah. And so Bryce's first, chance to be at home, the Saints defense has not gotten any worse. They've lost a couple pieces, but they've not, been worse off for it.
Yep.
And so I think that is scary to watch, to see how that front seven is going to do against our offensive line.
And what's Derek Carr going to do?
So that, Derek Carr was, I think, a good acquisition for the Saints. He's reliable and has somehow been able to be, at least impactful in the dumpster fire that is the Las Vegas Raiders and everything that's gone on that organization since he's gotten there. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget he's taken them to the playoffs at 2 different times. Yeah. And if it weren't for his injury back however many years ago it was, mm-hmm. He was on an MVP route there. Yeah, and even 2 years ago he was a big piece into doing so. And so I think that they will be able. It'll be more on the head coach for the Saints, I think, to see how they can kind of make the system all work. But that's going to be a battle, of new coaches, a battle of new teams. It'll be the first matchup in the new era for the NFC South. The whole NFC South is completely different now, and so this will be the big, our first rivalry game against the Saints, and that's the one you want to pencil in. Yep. It's going to be Monday night. It's going to be packed. Bryce's first game as a starter, or more than likely. I think that one's pretty big. That one's going to be a very. It's hard to tell that early on, but outside of that, I think Chicago is probably my those are my 2 ones.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some fun ones on the schedule. I'm definitely excited to see how things play out the rest of this offseason. I can't wait, but I know if I blink too hard, it's going to be here tomorrow. So it
is, and I think it's another one where you got to take a look at the schedule, and it's a tough schedule for this team to hit off in its first year, and I think going even 8-9, 9-8 is a win at the end of the book. And you got because a lot of these games, Minnesota, Detroit, Dallas, Jacksonville, those are all really 50-50 games. Those could be coin flips. There's a lot of games that could be coin flips.
Depends
on
which version of those teams show up.
Yeah, and we've seen last year's NFL. There was more up and down from teams than I've ever seen before. It was unbelievable.
It's the league is definitely any given Sunday type of league now.
Absolutely.
They said that for a long time, but I think right now in this era of football, it's definitely any given Sunday. You never know what's going to happen. But, Jack, I appreciate you for coming by. I definitely hope to have you on again. I know I will. But also, real quick, Panthers updates. This is the man. This is the man you want to come to for the Panthers updates. Jack Taylor TV on Twitter. If I get it wrong, let me know.
Right.
But
you got it.
Jack Taylor TV on Twitter. Follow him, and he'll keep you updated not only on Carolina Panthers but anything sports Charlotte wise. This is the man to go to. Definitely appreciate you for coming by.
Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, of course. And until the next time that we meet on the show, definitely hope you guys enjoyed the show. This is the Keep Prowling podcast. Once again, I appreciate Jack for coming by, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.